Yeah, thank you, Godard, for the lovely introduction, and thank you so much for coming today. It's a very great chance for me also to share something with you. And also this room is very special. Like, I feel like I'm facing, when you go to Star Wars and when they're like judging I don't know, this samurai, or I don't know how you call it, like, it's like you are judging me. Yes, Skywalker, yes. Anyway, yeah, my focus is mainly filmmaking, but what I want to show you today, I want to show more like different practice, but I would define them also part of the production of film, because I understand filmmaking as the work on context or narratives, or how you narrate the storytelling. So I will show you some different example today, and I will not show too much video tonight because I know they are quite boring. It will be not so nice to let you sleep on this lovely Friday evening. So, but I will give you a brief introduction of work and let you understand the background, how I made it, so you can also imagine how the work is. And if you have interest, of course, we can exchange information later on. And first of all, I want to show you a very, very old work of mine, which I really, I think I had never really shown somebody. I made in 10 years ago, 2012. And that was the time when I was dreaming to learn how to make film. And I used to study in Germany, in UDK, in Berlin Art School. But our art school had an exchange semester with Chicago Art Institute. And to some of you might know already, Chicago Art Institute is a great name in the film industry. They have, for example, one of my favorite filmmaker, Apichatpong from Thailand, or Hong Sang-soo from South Korea. They are all graduated there. So even just for me to want to, to breathe the same air which they might breathe before, that was already make me very happy. So I applied to exchange to Chicago Art Institute. And of course, the life there is totally different from what I expect. When I arrived, I realized if I only stay for half a year, one semester, I cannot really get any house contract, because normally they want to rent somebody who stay longer. So in the end, I ended up in the Chinatown in Chicago. So, I think Chicago, because you probably have no idea, Chicago is, you can imagine the city is a little bit like a long shape. And Chinatown is, I will show you a map. So this is a map. So Chinatown is kind of 100 years ago, like the beginning of the last century. The old Chinatown was located in the city center where they call Loop, in the Chicago center. But later on, there's a rumor, but we don't know, nobody can prove. The government decided to relocate the Chinatown into the south of the city, because even southern part of the city where you see Garfield, it's the center of the black neighborhood. So we don't know, as I mentioned, but there's a rumor the government decided to relocate Chinatown in between the so-called black neighborhood and the white neighborhood. And that was really kind of like cultural shock for me, because firstly, where I grew up in Asia, we don't have this obvious social segregation appear in the city that obvious. It really remind me of this study of, if you are familiar with, for example, like verdois, or like, these color lines appears. But when I was living in the Chinatown, which is in the middle of the white community and black community, I have this new idea actually, because I am the person who actually live on the color line. So if there is this blackness study about, they call that double consciousness. If you are familiar with the blackness study, here where I am standing on the color line, I'm thinking if I do need to have like so-called, I call that triple consciousness, or another kind of thinking, to help me to understand the situation. What kind of situation I will show you. So if you stand on the platform of the Chinatown station, you can see on the one side is the way to city center, and you can see there are mainly the people who have a lighter skin color, which means white people or Asian. And on the other hand, on the side of the platform is mainly darker skinned people. And that's Chinatown Station, the upper pictures. And the lower picture is the white neighborhood center and the black neighborhood center. So, so that time I have no idea how to do film, but I have this idea maybe because I imagine that transport or public transport is a sharing space for the people who leave their house and then go to the place where they start their day. So it's the sharing space where they actually support every different economy movement. So I try to use camera to follow, to document what the people are doing inside the train. So the image before is this, you can see that's the way I was thinking. So I just like take on the train and use my camera. It's like, yesterday I also mentioned, it's like this early thinking of making documentary film from Zika Vertov, like this kind of keynote eye to see the world through the camera. So I simply document how the passengers and different life happening on the platform and the train station. This was the early work of mine, and actually later on when I see back to this work, because I don't know if you know, it's actually illegal to film in a subway station, especially in the United States. So at that moment, I was just purely thinking, okay, I want to finish the work, so I create some kind of secret camera. And then I could above to change the focus secretly, just because I want some shots with some natural movement of the passengers. When I look back today, I do feel, okay, actually I did some illegal things and I was not so polite. But that also influences me in the way that what's the relationship between the camera and me, and also my subjects who I want to see, and also this experience of living on the color line, not on the side, each side, or I'm in between, what that means when I'm holding the camera. So all this thinking actually influences the later work of mine. And I think this summarized from the sociologist Arjun Appadurai is quite precise, to see how we can explore these cultural disjunctures between our society, this broken part of this whole, which in between us to make people separate. How can we explore this space in between us? He suggests 5 scapes which might allow us to explore. First is ethnoscapes, and secondly is mediascapes. Third is technoscapes. Fourth is financescapes. Fifth is ideoscapes. Of course, he has this social study approach to how to see the societies. But I do think these 5 different scapes are helpful for us, especially when you are working not only with camera, but also with some research-based practice that helps us to try to grasp some topic which we might can start to work on. And so now I'm gonna share with you a new work I made. It was finished in actually end of last year, but I always write 2022 because then because when you apply film festival, if you write too early, then later on there's no film festival on your film. So you try always to write newer. So I try to write 2022. And before I show you shortly the work, I want to introduce some background. So in a recent year, I started research about the European colonialism movement after I graduated from art school in Berlin. And I have this focus of the German colonialism movement because German neocolonialism is something actually quite invisible in the German society. The main reason is that the most discussion are covered by the critiques of Nazism or the Nazi history. So I am working with some friends and also activists about the German colonialism, not only in Germany, but also in African continent. But what I discovered when I arrived in Africa, that was the first country I arrived, is called Togo. Togo was the former colony from Germany. And what I realized is the great influence from China, the mainland China today, not only because all the big infrastructures are building at the moment by Chinese companies, but also the young cultures. A lot of people are learning Mandarin for their second languages. You can imagine a lot of people don't learn English, but they learn Mandarin because China can provide them better chance to study later. So they rather might choose to study later to promote their studies in China rather than to United States or the other country. So I start to interested in like how China and all this, actually it's not only China, but economy is always not about one country. It's all about how this network built. But China could be a symbol to let us to see through how the economy scapes are built up. And this is a phone, as you might notice in a billboard at the background. It is the most popular smartphone. I was just sharing with a friend from China. This phone is very interesting. If you live in Asia, you never heard about this phone called Techno. But if you are on the African continent, it's everywhere. They occupy more than 40% markets in the whole continent. And this company, they are from China, but they only sell their products in Africa. And what's very interesting of this phone is that it was back to 2018 and 19 when I was making the film. The advertisement from this film, they always focus on this effect of their selfie camera, which allow the customers, when they make selfie, you can make your face skin tone brighter. So you can see they feature like you can have a brighter skin when you use this cell phone to make selfie. And this kind of digital, we call that digital whitening, or like this kind of effect really bring us back to certain kind of the discussion we might talk about through Frantz Fanon or all about this white mask and all this older discussion. But what here show us is this kind of new movement effect by the coding, because the smartphone or we call that computational photography, is not anymore about some perpetrator behind the camera and make the shot, because the photo or the adjustment are made by the algorithm. And there's American scholar Ruha Benjamin, she called that new gene code. Not new gene code, but new gene code. So how code actually create a new kind of segregation between different class or skin color. And we also mentioned yesterday in Anne's seminar about this. There's a Google phone, in 2019, Google, they are developing their smartphone called Pixel. And that was a phone called Pixel 4. Because they also realized their phone cannot really censor the darker skin. What I mean is, so a few years ago, you can imagine, maybe today a lot of problems already solved, but just few years ago, a lot of smartphone, when your skin is too dark and you try to make selfie, the algorithm cannot figure out where your eye or your features, face feature are, and they cannot really capture your face. And a lot of company actually, a lot of company are actually realize this problem. So, like Google Pixel 4, they literally go onto the street in New York and give out their cell phone to the homeless, especially black homeless people, to let them play some smartphone games. But while playing the game, they are recording their face. And of course, they didn't tell them, because those homeless people, they only thought they are playing the game and trying the new games, and they got $5 gift cards. But what they didn't know is actually their facial features are recorded by Google company, and that was a big issue in 2019. And of course, they stopped this afterwards. But that really showed us all this algorithm, the problematic algorithm which we are still using today. And we're back to the technophone, which I just mentioned before. The technophone, what they try to do is, they tell you, I can capture your face and make your skin look brighter. It sounds easy, but it actually is not easy. Because later on, I start to research about how all these productions are made. I realized the algorithm, which is provided by Techno, they actually customize. They ask another company customize, that outsourcing to a Taiwanese company called MediaTek. It's the biggest chips company today since 2021. So they design a lot of chips in your smartphone and computer today. And there is this term we call that Taiwan connection. What is Taiwan connection? China and Taiwan, because a lot of company, their headquarters are in Taiwan, but they have their factory in China. For example, like Foxconn, who produce the iPhone for you today. And the reason for that is it's easier for, Taiwan is like in between United States and China. So if you have a headquarters in Taiwan, you can have easier market access to United States, but you can produce your products cheaper in China. Anyway, so Technophone, they outsource their algorithm to this Taiwanese company called MediaTek. And I was researching about how actually they made this algorithm, and it's really not easy to let the algorithm see your face, because just simply make things become wider, that's called filter. But if you want the computer to say, hey, I don't want everything become wider, but only my face, then the computer have to know where is your age, where the age of your face is. And that's very difficult. And that's why Techno were kind of become the pioneer of this new digital of, against, we call that these digital algorithm problems. But this story also let us discover a very strong fact that it doesn't matter which device or camera we are using. It doesn't matter we are using a old analog camera or a Blackmagic. It's a Blackmagic 2 or something. Anyway, and it doesn't matter which camera or how developed our equipment are, but something always stay there because when we look back to 40s or 50s until 90s, you might already know about this Shelly car, which was used before 90s. They have these white female models as a color standard for the photographer or filmmaker around the world. So for example, it doesn't matter where you make film, when you print out, you use this car, this white female model as the standard for your skin color. And it was used until 90s, until they finally realized, the Kodak company finally realized, okay, there's some racial problem here in our products. So they started to include different racial models in their Shelly cards. And also I want to share with you this interesting advertisement from 92 from Olympics game. It's just a few seconds. I will just show you quickly. Oh, I think we don't have sound here. Maybe do we turn off or?
Is it still in there?
It's still there, yeah. I mean, this is fine, but later I want to show something.
Yeah, let's see.
Is a video with sound normally?
There's a sound now. Oh, so it was
there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry for the interruption. So until 90s, finally the Kodak film, they realized the problem of their products. So they create a new product line called True Colors. And they show this. Have you noticed they have this? I will just play again quickly.
Life is full of bursts. Your true colors shine through. Some big, some small, each one is special. So don't be afraid to let them show. If you were his parents, would you trust this moment to anything other than Kodak Gold film? No other film in the world is your true color than Kodak Gold.
Yeah, for me, it's this advertisement not only about like how ironically this true color is, but also how advertisements are constructed by Olympics and black kids doing taekwondo, and all these elements quite, for me, interesting to see why this decision was made. As a filmmaker, of course you notice nothing is neutral, right? Like everything is planned, and why these elements are important there and why they use that. And later, through some friends' connection, I do find the engineer who who is from MediaTek, from this Taiwanese company, who actually made the algorithm which can make the face become brighter. His name is called Wang Shufan, and he's a very nice guy, and we had a very good discussion about actually this technological discrimination, because I want to ask him the question if actually this problem can still exist through the algorithm or in general through a computer or through their data. And this is another image I want to share with you. It's just a few years ago. Also, there is a camera from Canon who has this sensor who can see if somebody close their eyes, but maybe some AZ and their eyes might be a little bit too small for the algorithm. So the algorithm thought these models, they actually close their eye, although they didn't. So this kind of, the problem generated by algorithm. So I in the film I made, it's called The Lighting. It's a kind of consists of different documentary and interviews with different experts, like Wang Shufan from MediaTek, and so they share actually from their professional experience to see why it actually happened, and it's all about data because, like what we know, all the algorithms function perfectly what we want, and the problem is why there was this problem of Kodak film before and why there is a problem today with our coding. It's because the person who actually made the chemical material for the film or the person who actually coding the algorithm. So if there's some BIOS never be touched or never be discussed, and this BIOS or this problem or this ideology will still keep remain, doesn't matter which machine or how progressed we are in our technology. And also in my film, I also interviewed some filmmakers while my research trip in different countries. But this year is mainly in Togo because that was the time I had to spend more time in Togo. So I interviewed the filmmakers in Togo about how they actually deal with the problem of lighting. Why is lighting? Because lighting is like this, like the lighting is the instrument for the filmmakers to make the shot more in terms, I would like to choose a better words, but most camera person might say more beautiful. Because if you are familiar with camera, you know lighting is probably as important as the camera itself. It's so important how you create the image. And for, of course, the filmmakers with a darker skin color or who have to deal with the models with darker skin color, they need the lighting a lot just because the camera we are using today, it needs a lot of mechanical adjustments to adjust the ISO or blender to fit into enough light come in so that you can have a more so-called beautiful shot. And that's why when we talk about this, I interviewed different cameramen. They also give me a very interesting idea. I also shared yesterday with the students that actually we don't need to build a camera in a way which we are building today. That is to say, actually, the camera we are using today is like if there's not enough light, we have to turn up the ISO or whatever to make it become brighter. But if we design the camera the other way around, which means we have to reduce the light, which means if the dark surrounding should be the standard, and we should reduce the light in order to make a beautiful shot, it's totally makeable actually. But we already get used to the ordinary setting of the camera today, what we are using. So there are so many interesting discussions between me and all these photographers from Togo's. And in my film, I will not show you too much later, but later I will show you a very interesting part of the film. And that's related to this because you remember this shot from the Kodak advertisement with they feature the kids doing taekwondo. That reminds me this golden time of the Asia of the film industry in the 70s, because that was the time actually, especially Bruce Lee's films were extremely popular, and Bruce Lee was a figure actually kind of because his film is always, I don't know if you ever seen his film. It's very structurally very simple. It's always, beating a white man. So doesn't matter if it's Asian beating a white man or black person beating a white man, but always the white man will be the person who be beaten. And one of his last work, Enter the Dragon, for example, he invited Gene Kelly. He was one of the prestigious, very famous martial artists from United States, one of the very famous black kung fu master. And Bruce Lee invited him to show kung fu in the film. As you see, to show especially to the Chinese audience. So I think, of course, Bruce Lee is talking about kung fu, but he also wants to deal with these things that if we see kung fu as a cultural element, and these elements shouldn't attach only to just one race. So not only kung fu can be done by Asian, but also the other people can do kung fu. And for this, for us, because we really want to remake these parts, which I will show you. It's very short, just 1 minute. For this shot, we even went to learn. Me and my film workers, I forced everybody to learn Jeet. Do you know what is Jeet? Jeet is the Jeet Dao. Jeet is the kung fu invented by Bruce Lee. As you know, maybe actually Bruce Lee was trained as a philosopher. You know that, right? So Bruce Lee was trained as a philosopher, and his masterpiece is to create Jeet. And Jeet is not about kung fu. Jeet is about a philosophy. What is that philosophy? Jeet means to cut your movement, which means it doesn't matter which kung fu or which movement you are making, but when you do Jeet, the thing is to be fast. You have to cut your enemy's movement so your enemy cannot finish their gestures. So you have to cut before they can achieve their punch. That's about Jeet. So Jeet is not about how to fight the others, but to kind of flip the way we think about Kung Fu, because it's about how to cut, how to not let the other people finish their job. So I will show you very quickly the Kung Fu part we made for our film. It's called The Lighting, and it's inspired by the 70s Hong Kongese film. So it was, we call that, or I call that expanded documentary film, which means, so I try to make documentary film not so boring. And I didn't show you the boring part today, so you might not know how boring the film is. But I tried to create the multi-channel film installation. And so the original, the lighting film consists of 3 big circles, and there are LED light systems behind the circle screen, which is synchronized with the film. So when you watch some different movement from the image, there is a different lighting effect, also because the film itself is called The Lighting. But why this three circle is not only because when I research about technophone and also when I research about the smartphone in general, I realized today it's very popular that we have this three camera setting on our smartphone. I mean, I have iPhone 10, only have one camera, but maybe you have three camera, which is better than mine. So today this three camera or even more camera, I don't know, setting is become extremely popular. So I want to make this film which, you look through the smartphone camera to see how it is. So you look with the camera, your eyes look through this lens to see the world. That was the idea at the beginning. But also the second point I want to bring to you today is also about the measurements of the early measurement of the skin color. So in the film, I also show this, you can see in the image here, the three circles, they are rotating like the color top. Color top is the things you just saw in the trailer, in the film. This is the things which in the early time, the traveler from the Western world, the traveler or missionary, they bring this kind of color top which you can spin to measure the skin tone color. And somehow, I don't know why, but there or this kind of setting, they think there are four skin color in the world. There are white, black, yellow, and red. And I mean, even today, a lot of people think in that way, right? Like skin color are divided by white, black, yellow, and red. And this kind of ideology has a very long history, and today we're not gonna go deeper with that because there's some reasons why it's like that. But what I think funny is, so there is this skin color setting with four colors, and the traveler from the Western world, they bring the color top, and then they set up the color top with different percentage of this color paint, maybe like 40% of black or 20% of white, and then spin it and to see if this color top match the human they are research about. And then if they see, okay, the color are similar, then they can record, okay, the people in this area maybe is in Taiwan, their skin color looks like this. But of course, today we all know it doesn't work, right? Like if we go to different lights, or if we go to sunshine, underneath sunshine, or if we are in the shadow, the color top or our skin color already show you different effects. So, of course, it sounds quite stupid for us today, but that was one of the earliest instruments for people to see the skin color. And what here interested me is that how actually these instruments or how this tool affect or infect or influence our perspective to see the color. Because if we go even back to before, to try to understand how the early ideology was established, we also cannot avoid how actually for example, Enlightenment movement or the scientific revolution will happen, because that actually relate to a lot of experiments or a lot of understanding today how we read the other culture too. For example, this is a very famous experiment you might have already studied in your high school, that in the 18th century when Newton did his famous experiment of using this optical prism to use this light beam shoot into the prism, and then to see how the white light is consists of different colors. So the white, when he shoot this white light beams into the prism, actually the light disperse into. We kind of generalize them into 7 colors today, right? And that's a sample I made when I traveled in Britain, in the British Museum. They have this Enlightenment gallery which show you the different resources which relate to Enlightenment movement, but also they are related to slave trade and colonialism. And of course, you know this book written by Newton about optics and how this light beam moves. But maybe you haven't read this book 100 years later, Newton, written by Goethe from Germany. Goethe, he has this book, Zu Farbenlehre. In English, it's called the Theory of Colors, which he wrote 100 years after Newton. And this book is, or from a scientific perspective, this book is a total failure because what we are reading today is still Newtonism studies, and nobody talk about how Goethe understand about light, right? But the thing is, actually, because Goethe himself is a writer, he's a poet, so he tried to actually approach this problem with his poetic attitude or poetic gestures. What does that mean? I want to show you this diagram, these pictures that can show you more clearly. So if you see this picture up there, this prism, it's written Newton, right? So it's the typical understanding of the light theory created by Newton. That's also how we understand today. But if you really try to do this experiment at your home, and you realize actually the light should look like that, and there is actually, if you look these light beams dispersed out, if you look the light beam in a different distance, actually you have a different result. Because when we talk about Newtonism result, that's the image at your position is left-hand side. This black one is like the picture we see. But Goethe asked in his book, wait a minute, actually, if you do more detailedly to see this diagram, you have this blank space when the light just comes out of the prism. And why nobody talk about this blank? And why this blank is there? And he think this Newtonism experiments, it should be criticized because that result only happened with a certain distance, because Newton won the experiment perfectly at the distance what he wants. So you have this perfect light. But he ignored the whole experiment, how the light goes. But what Goethe tried to ask is, what if the experiment is not only about the result, but also about the process? Why we don't ask about the process? And of course, later people realize Newton actually know about this blank space, but he intended not to talk because that's what he want to discuss. But what we see today is like also about enlightenment or colonialism or Westerners' philosophical thinking is all about this positioning, right? It's all about how we position the things at the right place. During the eating, we were just talking about Gestalt, the philosophy from Germany, from Heidegger. It's also about how can we position the things, the instruments, at the position where we want, and that's about this experiments about. And why I think Goethe's understanding of the experiments is valuable for us today is, of course, it was a failure in the history of science, but for us is, might be we can ask again today, where is this blank? And when we look through the lens, there might be something, although the lens is transparent, and we see the image, but between us, between the image, between our subject and lens, there are some space which we might already ignore during our practice. And after these studies, I also realized about these instruments and the lens and the deploy of the instrument. It's not only happen with camera. It's not only happen with the image making, but a lot of things. And which I wrote on our title today, but I didn't mention, so you might didn't see. So for Goethe, he has a term called turbid media. Turbid media is the things which are transparent. This media is different media, and turbidity is to see what this transparent media, how transparent it is. So turbid media contain not only glass, lens, but also air, water, all the things which light can go through, and all these media can affect the movement of light. So that was the research from Goethe. He was research about turbid media, and the lens was just one of his research. So of course he also tried different things like shoot the light beams into the water or into the moist airs. And there's another very famous, very interesting experience he did is he tried to create the opposite experiment from Newton. So he tried to create a dark room. A dark room with bright beam was from Newton. So he tried to create a reverse. So he tried to recreate a white room with a dark beam, which means he tried to make a shadow beam can shoot through the prism and see if these shadow beams disperse in different way. And I think it was failed because it's really hard to create. Maybe today we can do that, but yeah, I think he just kind of used some theory to try to understand if the light beam itself is dark, why it might happen. But anyway, for me, I realized this look through the lens is not only happen to camera, but also happen to a lot of things. So we call that turbid media. And this turbid media can be also the vitrine, like the glass in the museum, which in front of eyes, when we look through the vitrine to see the sculptures, but we never see this glass, right? When we go to the museum, there's a vitrine, we only see the object inside, but we never notice actually this vitrine, this transparent glass, also help to frame something, also help us to define the position of the objects. This is a famous film made by Chris Marker and Alan Renai in the 50s, but yeah, they talk about they went to the ethnical museum in France to research about African sculpture in the early stage. And the film was very controversial for the French government because they were kind of still in a colonialism. So the film was censored for 10 years till the 60s until the audience can watch it fully. But today you can just go to YouTube to watch. And this film is also influential for me because I want to share with you next practice I'm doing. That gonna bring you again back to my trip to Togo. That was also a few years ago. I went to Togo and then I started to research about African arts because at the beginning, to be honest, I tried to buy some sculptures as a souvenirs, and also I went to the African Art Museum. So I went to visit. It's the biggest African arts museum in Togo. It's called Mia Museum, and it's bigger than the National Museum of Togo in Lomé, and it contains so many. I think more than 1,000 sculptures with very huge space. It's like a park. But what very interesting in this museum is these pictures at the entrance of the museum. They have this picture of an Asian male shaking a hand with the president of the Togo, Nassim Bey. So when I see this picture in the African Art Museum, of course I feel strange why there's Asian men appear here and shaking the hand with the president of Togo. So I started to do some more research, and I realized actually this person, his name is called Mr. Xie. He's from China, and here in Togo, this museum is just very little part of his collections. Actually, he donates more than 5,000 objects to the National Museum of China in Beijing. It's the second, it's the biggest museum probably in the world, but the second most visited museum in the world, just after Louvre in Paris. So National Museum of China is actually should be about Chinese history. So if you go to China, you want to study about Chinese history, you should go to this museum. But very interestingly, since 2012, they established this African collection, the National African Collection, the first National African Collection in China. And it's all donated by this one person who opened the museum in Togo. And when we see this exhibition here, you can see it's kind of bring us back to very early kind of colonial perspective or colonial way of showing a sculpture from the other world, which means you put every sculpture together without really detailed explanation why they are here, and it doesn't matter which culture it is, they can put it all together. And also there's no, not divided by different generation, they have like newly made sculpture and old sculptures. So this exhibition is problematic, but for me as kind of art workers or cultural workers or filmmakers, I actually was more interested in why China need African collection today or since 2012. And that was the time why I visited the museum was because I was invited to have a show in Beijing. And that was the time when Beijing has also, it was 2018, they have this forecast, which is the China-Africa Conference, led by, actually I would say led by China. And in 2018, you can imagine there are 53 African leaders, the president from all around the continents, come all the way to Beijing to see the president of China. And of course, as you know, this conference is mainly about how much money China gonna give this year to all these countries, right? And we will not talk too much about the political part, but just want to let you know, I think, or at least from my perspective, why China need African collections. We cannot answer the question only with the art history, but we should see also with the other scapes like economy or finance scapes. And also if you see the Chinese pop culture during the time, if you ever live in China, you might know about this case just a few years ago. They have this very controversial national theaters. It's called CCTV New Year's Gala. CCTV is the BBC for China or CNN for China. CCTV at the beginning I thought it was a CCTV, the monitor camera, but actually CCTV is a national television program run by government. And they have this New Year Gala, which they want to show the friendship between China and Africa. But somehow I don't know who designed the show. This person has some misunderstanding, so he or she actually made a black face. So there is a Chinese actress who did a black face, and then they ask a black actor to act a monkey wearing a monkey dress there. So it's like you don't need to ask a black person to act monkey, but somehow they did it. And there is another advertisement during the time. It's about detergents, and then the story of detergent is there is a black person who wants to flirt Asian female, and the Asian female put the black person into the washing machine, and after wash, this black person become an Asian. So some kind of like very problematic advertisement. But that's 2018 and 19, and still that was seeable through the television around the whole countries. And I have to say, not only China, but also in Hong Kong and Taiwan, we had a big problem with this problematic ideology. So I was working on an exhibition in Beijing. I talk about why, so my starting point was talk about why China need African sculptures. But I go through all these things, not only my field research in Africa, not only a Chinese community in Africa, but also the pop cultures. I collect all the image material, and I did this lecture performance video. Because I'm as a filmmaker, I'm always trying to narrate the story in different ways. So, of course, we do the film, we shoot the film, but somehow I also want to try the different way to show the image. So, in this work, I separate the image on the ground and try to tell each image. And it was inspired by this French philosopher called André Malraux. In the 40s, so this is André Malraux, the original picture made in his studio. You might saw this picture before. You can imagine in the 40s and 50s, that was a time when photography or the technique of photography become more popular, and people start, in art history, we start to talk about how photography will influence the way of image productions. And there are also Walter Benjamin or Abi Warburg, all these philosophers start to talk about how image look differently. And André Malraux, you might don't know, actually when he was young, he actually even went to Cambodia and he stole the sculpture in Cambodia, but he was caught by the French army. And then since then he has this question why French army can take the sculpture in Cambodia, but I can't. So then he's become a kind of cultural critics about this colonialism. And in his book, it's called Imaginary Museum, he tried to compare all these different sculptures from the other places. So it's kind of the early books which talk about how we see sculptures through photograph and how we compose sculptures from different cultures together, and what does that mean when we compose different cultures together. And I think this image is very interesting also in a way is how he see the image. He put every image on the ground and see from above. It's basically how we treat our computer today, right? We have different folders on our desktop, and we have like my desktop, I can show you later. It's just exactly like that, like a lot of images, and I never can find my folders. And I did this lecture performance, and to compare different cultural with the material I collect. So I replace all the image. I only use the gestures inspired by him, also by this early stage of watching the image. But I want to show the new material and to understand why when the Western museums start to give him back, to return the problematic sculpture today, and that's also the time why China started to create their national African collections. And I have another thing, which is on the one side, I research about the collections, African or other culture collections in Asia, and also simultaneously, I'm research about the Asian collection I collect in Western institutions. For example, I want to show you this exhibition. It was around 100 years ago in 1929 in the Akademie der Kunst in Berlin. It's actually a big building today, still exists, and they even show the Berlin Biennial today. So you can imagine 100 years ago, there was no Berlin Biennial. So, but that time, there was also a very big exhibition called Ausstellung Chinesische Kunst. It means Chinese art exhibition. And it was one of the most exhibition at early stage, which show a lot of artifacts from Asia. They have more than 1,500 collections show in the Akademie der Kunst. And that was the most important exhibition at that year. And also, later on, it became one of the marked exhibition of showing the sculptures or artifacts from Asia in general. What very interesting of this exhibition is that there was actually an English scholar called Francis Sykov. So this person, when he visited the exhibition in Berlin 100 years ago in 1929, so he had this idea to write a text about the exhibition in Akademie der Kunst. And he had this title called Phantasmagoria. And for a person who studied about theater and film, you might know actually phantasmagoria is an old technique for the theater to create this kind of fantastic or ghosty stage setting, which means they use projections and light and reflections to show today we call this kind of AR style of stage. So some actor might hide himself behind the glass and use the glass to reflect, and somehow it can appear like a ghost on the stage. There is an image show you roughly how it goes. So it's an old technique of stage making, phantasmagoria. But in his text, he's nothing to do with this. He was working with. He has this idea. He tried to image the collections in the museum start to become alive, to become a ghost at the midnight when the museum closed. So in his text, in his review of the exhibition, he tried to image all the Chinese collections become awake at the midnight when there's nobody, and then start to talk to each other. And it's a little bit like the film, today we know it's called Night at the Museum, when the collection become alive and start to talk to each other. But these narratives already appeared 100 years ago by this English scholar. And he tried to use these narratives to let the collection to introduce themselves. It was the strategy he used. And then for me, that was interesting because, to show the artifacts from Far East, so-called Far East, or from Asia, is already a way to fulfill the image for the Western audience, to see what Asian looks like. But this scholar, not only about the image, but he want to think why that could be when this sculpture start to talk, which means he also tried to hijack the voice of the collections. And that's the part I think is quite fascinating. It's not only about image, not only about the figure, but also about how to speak and how the voice can be narrate. And another very famous case of the Asian collection in the Western Museum is this Chinese museum in Fontainebleau. It's a museum in Paris. And it was a residential palace for the kings before. And in 1863, the Queen Orkney, she opened this Chinese museum to display all her collections. And this museum today, if you go to Paris to visit there, it still looks almost the same as 150 years ago. So it's not much changed. And then I also want to introduce you briefly how those collections come from. because you might heard about the burning of the Benin city in West Africa to all these kind of problematic sculpture called Benin bronze today, but you probably haven't heard about the burning of Sama Palace. So you can imagine in around 1856 to 1860s, there's a war called Opium War. What is Opium War, for somebody who might don't know, is like somebody who wants to sell some drugs to Chinese people, and Chinese people say no, and this person say, hey, if you don't, I'm gonna burn you. Then that was about Opium War. And during the Opium War in the 1860s, this was very interesting. If we see from the technology part, people even define Opium War, the second Opium War. There's the first Opium War and second Opium War. Second Opium War can be defined or can be seen as the beginning of the modern Chinese history. How come? Because when the British and French army went to Beijing, tried to conquer, and you really see the confrontation between, we call that cold weapon and hot weapon, which means a traditional weapon and at that time like a new technology weapon. Hot weapon means like a gun and cannon, and cold weapons like sword or like metals, whatever, knife. And if you ever play this computer game called Empire of Age or StarCraft or whatever, you know, like when you click the wrong button and you upgrade your empire wrong, and you have this effect, like two different generation armies start to fight each other. And that was a big shock for Chinese army. So after that, they start a lot of so-called modernization or westernization inside the Chinese politics. And these objects in the Chinese museum, they're all from the Sama Palace. But what's very interesting is inside the Chinese museum is not only the things from Sama Palace, but also there are things from Tibet, from Korea, from Japan, from Thailand. So this museum is called the Chinese Museum, but it's actually the Museum of Asia. Because at that time, 150 years ago, maybe for them, China was more like a symbolic, a face of Asia. So they call that Chinese Museum. But actually, this is a museum of objects or artifacts from different areas. And this museum, we can see, if we see a difference between the collection from the African collection during the colonial time or the Asian collection during colonial time, we can also see the difference here. What are the differences? So if you go to the Quai Branly in Paris, if you see like African arts from the colonial time, you will see the museum try very hard to show you how the objects originally looks like. So they show you the authenticity of these specific objects from specific cultures. But on the other hand, in the Chinese museum here, you can see when they acquire the collection from China, they start to rebuild it. So, for example, this 5 vase here is actually originally the vase for the king to show the worship. They use this vase to put flowers or liquids. But here, when the objects arrive in France, the Prince Ogni started to recreate objects. She actually tried to build the handle holder upon this vase, and so in the end it became a candle holder. And on the other hand, here you can see there is it's a kind of like incense box where you burn the incense or ash. You have this box, and then she used the lid of the box and put upside down and become a big chandelier. It's very, very creative, like how they made these kind of furnitures. And on the ceiling, if you see, it's a Tibetan tanka. So it's like kind of traditional Buddhism painting. Normally you should hang it on the wall, but this creative princess, she actually put on the ceiling and become kind of like, I don't know, like posters or whatever, and then connect with this chandelier. So I would call this a realm of recreation. So it's not only about to show the objects from Far East, but it's also about how creativity this princess is. And I think these objects in the Chinese museum also can tell us different story today, also because this museum was stolen at least 2 times in the history. One time, the first time was in 1999. That was around 15 objects was stolen. And in 2015, there was another case, also 15 to 20 objects was stolen. And why this museum, and why? And because there's another trial again in 2019, but it was stopped by the French police. So why there are so many thieves want to steal the objects from this museum? We don't know, but there's a rumor say maybe because the Chinese government want it back. So maybe all this case might be also related to the Chinese government, because for Chinese government today they think these objects are the stuffs which Westerners stole 150 years ago, so they have the right to take it back. So it's not steal, but it's an act of taking back. And this ideology can be also seen in the pop culture. For example, like I put Jackie Chan here, not because he stole the objects in Chinese museum, but in 2012, he has this film called Chinese Zodiac 12, CZ12. I don't know, have you seen this film? So this film is actually about Jackie Chan very skillfully go to French museum and steal the objects. And those objects are also from the Sama Palace. So he, of course, it's nothing directly to do with the Chinese museum today, but I can see, or this film can present us this kind of ideology. Somebody want to take the artifact back. And it could be also the Chinese government. And I'm not the police and I'm not the detective, so I don't know how it happened. But I do see this absence or this disappearance of the objects in the museum. Not only about return objects, so the victim become empty, but also the action of stealing let the museum become empty. The emptiness of the objects can somehow present us another situation of the museum, how we see the museum today. And there is this talk between a scholar, Arila Atole and Bonaventure. They also suggest us to see the museum differently, to see the museum as a crime scene. They have this famous term called the museum as crime scene. It means, yes, we do know there's a problem of museums. So when we walk into the museum, we probably don't see the museum as a place where we produce the dominant knowledge anymore, but rather we see the museum as a place where we can find the crime of the history. We can see, because they are all there, they are all displayed there, we can see more detailedly. And Bonaventure also have this very beautiful implication he used, choking. He said the Western Museum is like choking today, because the very interesting thing about choking is it doesn't matter, you can eat very delicious food or very high class food, but when you are choking, you can still die. And he think it's what happened to the museum who are still want to hold these valuable collections. So I told you that I try a different way to narrate the stories and to do film in a different way. And so I combine all these different ideas I collect from the museum, from the Asian collection in the Western Museum. That was the time I was invited to do an exhibition in Paris. So I was thinking, okay, I want to do something about this Chinese museum. But I want to create a museum which is stolen. So in my museum here, you can see there's a vitrine, but all the glass is broken. And I try to narrate the voice again because I'm interested in how actually voice can replace the object to speak. And so I also see this space as a filmmaking, but the film appears with the sound, with the lights. So I also create different light systems inside the vitrine. When the vitrine speaks, so this vitrine speaks like live creatures, and they are telling the audience stories about 3 different historical points. 3 different story points when the collection in the Chinese museum, the status are changing. The first is 1860, when the collection in China are taken by the Opium Wars army, and second from 1860 to 1863, before the Chinese museum was open, how creativity these princes were, and like how they tried to create all these new fusions, collections. And the third point is from 2015 till today, we see this emptiness of the museum. We see the crime happen in the museum. And I create this installation, sound installation, and then there is this subtitle up there. So because the piece was in French, so in order to let everybody can understand more, there is also subtitle. And I try to show you different things today. Just also want to not only to show you how great my programmer or how great my cameraman they are, but also want to expand this way of filmmaking or the relationship between you and image. Because if we see the museum itself, I think it's important for us as artists, because a museum or gallery is a space where we are working in. It's just like the relationship between filmmaker and kino. So what I'm interested in expanded cinema is because expanded cinema is the way you see the film or cinema in a different way. When you do expanded cinema, you also have to consider the space, the time, and also how the audience see your work, how long they stay. Everything become your element is about expanded cinema. And I do see that's also same as how we see the space of the exhibition and how the museum is constructed. And I want to back to this image which I just showed you before from Chris Markers and Aaron Lenai, because I think also yesterday we were talking about this. There's a filmmaker called Trimina. She had this famous sentence. She had a famous sentence say, there is no such things as documentary, which means we think documentary as a neutral production, a neutral process of production, but actually there is no such things. According to her, everything comes because if you will see the image or the picture as a fluid element, we can see every day different images floating in front of our eyes. Everything from outside in movement, she thinks it is documentary, or in the sense how we understand documentary, it is documentary. Everything outside in is documentary. And every image, every production inside out is already fictional, it's a fiction. So there's no such things of documentary. It's also the things we can ask. Maybe there's also no such things as a neutral exhibition or neutral museum, because there is this term called exhibitionary complex, which is borrowed term from Foucault. It means, Foucault about this construction of the jail, construction of the architectures. Actually, museum is also an exhibitionary complex where our knowledge and image are deployed intentionally. It's about how image, how knowledge are bring in front of us. It's like the Newton's experiment in the Enlightenment time, how the image and how the optical image have to be displayed at a certain distance, which we have to see. And I think if we have some freedom today to do any artwork, I think we should also try to see what's in between us, what's between us and our subject. What is those things we can't see through the lens, through the air? There are things behind all these things we can't see. And I would like to end my presentation now. I hope I didn't take too much time, so we have time to have some questions, and I hope I didn't make you too sleepy. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Right, so maybe let's open it up for some questions. Who will start? Yeah, maybe I will start.
Please, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very, very interesting how you start with going to LA and seeing the segregation.
Chicago.
Okay. The segregation between like how different races or people are using this the subway in a different way, and then you go to like Africa and all this kind of this identity, how it's being formed by the camera, but you start with your own camera more or less, and you end with how is camera working. And I'm wondering, like, if you are filming now, like how does these two relate together? Like, if you're filming your awareness, and if you're using other media, for example, with the guy from not Media Markt, but Media like
Saturn.
MediaTek, yeah. Like, what are you doing with him, for example? In expanding this media or using this media, like, are you trying to transform how film is being used and in what way?
Yeah, I mean, you touch a very, maybe you don't know, but you touch a very painful point of a filmmaker, because, I mean, every filmmaker knows that it takes just so much time to find the money. So, and also if you want to do some research, it takes so much time to find money again. It's always lack of money. And so, a lot of filmmakers, although they are actually in the process of making film, like I'm also in the process of making film, but I have so much extra time to do other production just because I don't have enough money right now to shoot. So I do different installations and writings, and I try lecture performance and also song installation. It's, yes, once I do see them as a part of filmmaking, and also, to interview these people who has experts, who has experience of video or image production. I can learn from them too. Of course, this is all part of the filmmaking. But a crucial part of that is because I also need to wait very long until the budget arrives. So then I do need sometimes to digest many things and also to find enough research until I can turn on my camera and to shoot. Yes.
And then is this research a constant research that you have different elements you're researching, and like for example the moment you are invited for the Berlinale or for something else that you know, okay, now I can use this research to try to transform it into a work?
Yeah, somehow, I mean, in the end, you realize everything's connected together. Everything's connected together. And because, for example, I live in Berlin for very long, but I never know there is such a Chinese exhibition 100 years ago here. And also, I didn't know there is a Chinese museum in Paris also. And of course, for me myself, also there's a question like why I need to research about what is Chineseness, right? Like what is Chinese and what is Chineseness and what is non-Chinese, what is Taiwanese also. And also, when I say everything connect together is because I do think the colonial, like especially the Western colonialism history, does play a very important part of the contemporary art production. It doesn't matter, are you directly dealing with the colonialism history or not, but a lot of movement or a lot of invention during that time does play a very important role today. And many connections during that time which already exist before, but actually we didn't actually study into clearly. And for example, I was sharing with a friend just while we are eating. For example, I was research about Atlantic slave trade, and it's about Atlantic. I was reading this book called Black Atlantic because it's kind of try to understand the seascape as a place, how the modern blackness or black consciousness are formed. And then during this research, I realized most people actually, including me, don't know what happened after the slave trade of the Atlantic slave trade. What happened was, in the 19th century, there was a point when Western government, the British government actually started to ban the African slave trade. And that was the time suddenly there is not enough working force in America. So later on, they switched to the Asian market. So they started to import the Chinese laborers. They call that coolie. So there was this Chinese slave. I mean, basically they are slave, but they have another name called coolie. So they start to import coolie to replace the black force. And so I didn't know, for example, like the slave trade research can also relate to Asian slave trade research. So everything somehow connect to each other. So it doesn't, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I do try to see where the exhibition will happen, and then to see maybe there is some resource I'm working on at the moment, and I can also reflect the locality where I'm presenting the work and also try to communicate with the audience at that locations. But it's not always works. Sometimes I can't find, but anyway, I will show what I can. Yeah.
And if you have money, you make a feature length.
If I have money, yes. Yeah, it's like people. I don't know. It's not necessary to make a feature film. Of course, it's the feature film. Feature film is more than like 60 millimeter. 16 minutes. It's not necessary for a filmmaker to make a feature film. It's great to make short film, but people have this dream, It's like you have a dream to, I don't know, you never have Tesla, but you want to drive Tesla to see how computers drive, right? Like you try to, you want to see if you have money what you can do, and maybe afterwards you realize you are a very bad filmmaker to make feature film, then you give up. But at least I try when I'm young, yeah. So
you have like many ways of telling stories, or you try at least to find many ways of telling stories. What would you say is the most restricting way with the camera itself to tell stories?
I mean, there are so many ways to tell the stories, and I also learning every day. And all these great filmmakers are all very great storyteller. Even like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't know have you ever seen a film from Hong Sang-soo, like this Korean filmmaker? His film is like this early Asian long shot film from like Ho Xiaoxian, like super boring, like just there, and then the actors doing things, and there's not much narrations. This kind of long shot film, from Hong Sang-soo, he's doing this today. But even though somehow you want to watch more, and even he's trying to tell story without telling a story, but there's the stories. I am also experiments in a different way, and I believe you are also experiment every day with your media. Maybe you are a painter or you are a designer, because I do think even a graphic design, right, it's a storytelling, because you tell a story, but it's with a paper, and you have to finish the narrative inside this paper. And I do try many ways, and I have to say, as I keep mentioning, also what I've been trying recently is I realize like when you have so much research in your practice, and then in the end you have this very long documentary with a lot of interview, and it's become quite boring for the audience. And so what I'm trying nowadays is like how to make the audience not to sleep too, like how to entertaining the audience, how can let them actually finish the film, because nobody really, even me, I don't want to watch like a 7 hours long film without stories, So yeah, it's very hard. I can't give you an answer, but I bet it's a work we are all doing. Yeah.
May I ask you a question?
Please.
There are also a lot of papers and news about why Chinese governments want to invest money to Africa. And I'm wondering, as a contemporary artist or film director, and what do you think different kind of perspective you could provide during the research project?
You mean for me as...
For you, yeah.
So for me as a Taiwanese, or what's my position?
As an artist?
As an artist, yeah. To see what's Chinese engagement in the African continent. Yeah. Okay. It's a very big topic, and I do think we can talk about this, and because I'm not representation of any officials, but I do see there is many things going on, because, for example, in Germany, we talk a lot about Nazi history, and sometimes very few, but we also talk about colonial history. But what we actually don't really discuss in the course is about this influence from China, and also how we understand Chinese movement in African continent. I think it will be very flat to understand in a way is a neocolonialism, or very flat to understand is a way of the repetition of the colonialism which happened 100 years ago, because there are many fundamental differences between the Chinese movement in Africa. For example, they didn't burn down a city, but somehow we can also see the similar structures, like how the economy class are divided again, and how the economy flew from different ways. And what I'm really worried is this, what we also discussed here, the lackness of the sensibility in general in China, because it's not, of course, I think in a sociologist or in art scene are relatively fine, but for the publics in China, it's not only China, also in Taiwan, and also in South Korea, because the colonialism in Asia is not much about skin color. It's about, because like when Japan started to expand their empire, there was no obvious skin color difference between our colonizer and us. So the colonialism study in Asia is not much about skin colors, and I think that's probably the main reason why today most people are still very not be aware of this topic. You must know the toothpaste we are using every day is called literally it's called black man toothpaste, because in Asia people believe the black man has the whitest teeth, and this is the toothpaste we are still using today. Every day, my parents are using that. So if you go to Asia, you see that. And so this lateness of the self-criticism, I do think that will influence a lot when the Chinese company or the workers from China, when they start to come to Africa and try to work with them, because that would regenerate a lot of old problems which might also already happen before during the colonial time in Europe. And that's just basic things, and that can also, later generate the bigger things when that relates to even bigger topic like bigger economic exchange, or how for example the government want to give money, but this giving money things, these forecasts, all the leaders comes to Beijing. I think it's also kind of showing these empire gestures in many ways. I do have this feeling, and it does have some problems, I think. So there are many things to talk about, and yeah. But I'm against to see that as a Western colonialism. I might, like yesterday we tried to describe that, but I think the better term at this moment is it could be a neo-capitalism. Probably is more precise. Yes. Yeah. It's too much politics.
Any more questions?
No students have some. Is that too much today from like different cultures? A little bit hard to digest. Or you are just being shy?
I think it's shy.
Yeah, because I do prepare something in this case. Like if nobody gonna ask me question, I also prepare some material. Do we have time for that? Yeah. I know you're not gonna ask me questions, so yeah. I just have some more material for some times. I mean, of course, if you have any question, you can just raise your hand. I will come to you. But I do have some material. I want to show you some recent research I'm doing, and I think it's also related to our daily life too. So so a few years ago, I started to research about currency. So like a finance scape. Remember from upper the right, like economy scapes. So when I start to research about that, I realized there's a very big problem in Western Africa today, which they are still using a currency called CFA. CFA referred to colonial franc. So you can imagine today in West Africa, Union, they are still using the currencies from the colonial time. And then I encountered this activist. He's an activist and a rapper, a musician. And then he made this song called 7 Minutes Against CFA. So I think it's very interesting. So he collects 10 musicians from West Africa, and they produce one rap song together called 7 Minutes Against CFA. So they use rap music, they use the music to decolonize their currency. And then I thought, wow, yeah, it's very cool. And like we all have this dream for be in a band, right? So I also have this rock and roll dream. So I invite him. Of course, the time changed. Now the hip is not rock and roll anymore. It's a rap. So I invite him to do a song together. We make a hip hop song. So I also rapped together, and we made this song called "The Currency." And in this song, we made a record, a vinyl. And why is vinyl? Because we want to talk about the future currency. Also, in order to answer your question, when I'm traveling in Africa, I realize while the people are discussing about CFA, while the people are discussing about the colonial franc, they actually didn't notice the digital payment, which is imported by the Chinese company, is start to spread, which gonna replace the old currency. As you might already know, in China, there's a very, very few fiat money, which means in China, it's very dominant to use the digital payment. It's very hard to use cash in China. Even you want to buy a water, they don't might sell you just because you can't pay digitally. And also it's in China, they all use this called WeChat Pay or Alipay. They use this digital payment very brightly. And I think it's also related to, how company and government can control the data too, right? So this techniques is very convenient, but it's also related to how public data can be collected. So it's perfectly for some leaders in Africa too. And so I'm also telling this activist, his name is Alan, I'm saying, hey, yes, I think your song is great, but let's talk about digital payment also. So then we create this new song, and we try to approach what might happen in the future, what might happen when especially the Chinese digital payment technology occupy the market. And we intentionally make vinyl just because if you know electric wafer, so do you know in your smartphone there is a very tiny chips, and this chips is one of the most valuable things today. And when you want to produce the chips, they actually produce this big circle waffle. They call that electric waffle. And Taiwan is the most dominant production place today. And that's why Taiwan is between the confrontation of United States and China, because United company, they cannot lose Taiwan just because the chips production. So, and the size of the wafer today we can produce is almost the same as the vinyl. So we use this size to create this song called The Currency. And then after this cooperation, we start with our longer, because we realize there's so many things to do together. And also because he can provide me a lot of different aspects. And also we start to expand this research about the question of the currency. And recently, we started to research this location in KASKlezing. It's a place in Ghana, in Accra. And if you are a fan of Britpop, there's a band called Placebo. and Placebo also did a music video a few years ago in this place. And this is a place they call that the symmetry of the electric device. So which means the iPhone or MacBook or all the electric device, after we use and we throw it away, they mainly go to 3 places in the world. Firstly, in West Africa, mainly in Ghana, in KASKlezing. And then there's also in Guangzhou, in China, in southern China, and also in India, in a place nearby Delhi. So these 3 places collect the most electric, we call that E-West, the electric West around the world. And the living condition there is very bad, so people actually live there. And how it happened is because, again, the cheap labors, and because it's very difficult to reuse, to recycle the electric device. And the most cheapest way and easiest way is transport them the E-Waste to there and let the people take out the valuable metal again. And by taking out the metal, they have to burn. Because like some this shell and some these things is not valuable, so they just use fire to burn it in order to take the valuable metal inside the device. And if they do that, there it's extremely cheap, and then they can I mean, when I say they, I mean the company from the global north. When they buy the metal again, the valuable metal again from them, it can be much cheaper than buying from the real mining. So they call that urban mining. It means to remine the electric device in such places. So we start to interview with the people and to see actually, for example, how the money flow there and how the value can be generated and it can be accumulated again through all the production process. And also here I also find, of course, technofoam again, because it's the place where all the smartphones go in the end. So that's why I also answered in your question, like everything connect together, because I also didn't know, oh wow, I see so many technofoam here in the symmetry of the electric device. And yeah, I just shortly share with you some recent research I'm doing. I cannot show you any finished film yet. It might take another few years until I find the money to finish something. But yeah, that's the things, because again, back to our question about the floating of image, right? Like I also interested in the end of the image, like when all these devices which show us or which is making an image, when they die, where they're going, and then how the image can tell the story of the dead of the image or dead of the instrument of the image, something like that. I'm a little bit dizzy from this, but anyway, yeah. Do you have some question now? Still not?
Well, do you have a hip hop?
Do I like hip hop?
Because you made a hip hop record or a rock record?
It was a hip hop. It was a rap song. Yes.
Is it? Can we hear it?
I try. Oh, I don't have internet. Oh.
Yeah, you do.
Okay. Okay, let's do it. Ah, you already put it in my order.
No, I have to like this, but it takes 2 seconds.
Seriously?
Yeah. What's an @ sign? How do you do that?
At
Yeah.
like. Firstly, I have to go to my blogger and go to work. Okay, so that's our official website. It's very cheap, but yes, but here you can listen to music, and also you can see the lyrics. And by the way, if you have extra money, there's a Sternberg press where you can purchase, but the money doesn't come to me, it goes to Sternberg. So I'm sorry. But of course you can listen digitally.
Yo, yo, casse sombre, chambre froide, odeur de rat. Posé sur une table, j'étais un fringue à côté de moi. Une dame hurlait, la bave aux lèvres, attaché les mains derrière une chaise en métal. Un homme s'est approché, a ramassé le gun, l'a posé sur sa tempe, puis pressé la détente. Tu vois, cette tache rouge sur mon front, c'est bel et bien le sang de la dame en question. Dénoncer son mari, ouais, dans vos rêves, ce chef de peine en perd, mais quelle trahison. Quelques semaines plus tôt, le préfet en personne vint voir le roi du village de Bacala. L'exploitation de la mine sera chinoise. Parle à tes enfants, évitons tout à Allah. Sabotage de la mine, violente répression, des hommes en exil, leurs femmes en prison. Danda, la femme de Loulou fut arrêtée, torturée, violée, assassinée. Votre honneur, j'ai tout vu depuis la mallette. Avec des centaines de témoins, ce qu'ils ont fait du corps, je ne peux vous répondre. La mallette fut fermée, moi replongé dans le noir. J'ai revu la lumière dans un magasin de voitures, des Benz, des Opel, des BMW, monsieur le juge. Je suis juste un pied légaux, pour venant de naissance, colonie française d'Afrique. CFA, colonie française d'Afrique. Pour venant de naissance, colonie française d'Afrique.
百姓期望见马云，百姓期望见马云。你的名字叫支付宝，正巧我也是支付宝，阿里巴巴的支付宝。蚂蚁能做独角兽，使你安全没烦恼，多余的都不想带，香港他乡与物质，在意账单算得清，美好永远算不清，电子商务里程碑，酷到谁都比不了，谁都比不了。26笔手机账单代表26次深夜加班爆单。21世纪最缺的还是人才。
Fragen zu stellen bereit.
So, yeah, it could be the end of our presentation today. Right? Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and I'm really happy to share with you all these works. If you have any question, please come to me afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you.